In 1241, on the fields of Legnica in Poland, Duke Henry II looked toward the horizon and saw a sight that made his heart stop. Thousands of Mongol tents stretched as far as the eye could see. Campfires burned throughout the night, so numerous they could not be counted. The thunder of horse hooves echoed across the valley. Scouts and spies reported back in panicked tones. They are as numerous as ants, like locusts. At least 100,000, maybe 200,000 men. Duke Henry swallowed hard. He only had 25,000 warriors, including the most elite Teutonic knights in Europe. On paper, the odds seemed insurmountable, 1 to 4, maybe even 1 to 8, but he had no choice. If he didn't fight, all of Europe might fall to these nomads from the east. And then the impossible happened. Duke Henry was utterly defeated. He was beheaded on the battlefield, and his head was paraded through the city on a spear. Nearly 40,000 men died in the engagement. Europe trembled. Yet here's the twist. Duke Henry was not actually outnumbered. In fact, he had more troops than the Mongols present that day. The Mongol force in Poland numbered only about 8,000 to 20,000 men, a fraction of what rumors claimed. So what happened? How did a smaller Mongol force rout a European army that outnumbered them several times over? Before I answer, leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm genuinely curious which time zones are tuning into a story about medieval Mongols, because what you're about to hear will completely flip your assumptions about the Mongol army and reveal a profound lesson about real power. Sometimes it's not about numbers. Strategy, discipline, and psychology can decide victory or defeat. First, let's shatter a myth that has persisted for 800 years. When most people think of the Mongol army, they imagine an endless sea of horsemen sweeping across Eurasia. Massive numbers, 500,000, 700,000, maybe even 1 million warriors. Textbooks, movies, and some historical accounts reinforce this illusion, but modern scholarship paints a very different picture. The entire Mongol army at the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227 numbered only about 100,000 to 130,000 actual soldiers, not millions, not hundreds of thousands on every battlefield. Let that sink in. Alexander the Great fielded armies larger than that. Rome, at its peak, deployed larger military forces. Yet the Mongols, with fewer than 130,000 men, conquered more territory than any empire in history, from the Pacific Ocean to the Black Sea, Siberia to Persia. So, how did this happen? Where did the inflated numbers come from? Some of it comes from medieval exaggeration. Rashid al-Din, a 13th century Persian historian, wrote that the Mongol army numbered over 600,000 men. Another historian, Gajani, claimed 800,000. European chroniclers went further, reporting Mongol armies in Hungary of 500,000. But cross-referencing contemporary records, especially the secret history of the Mongols, a Mongolian text written immediately after Genghis Khan's death, gives a clearer picture. Genghis Khan's core force initially consisted of just 23,000 cavalry. By his death, after decades of campaigns and recruitment from conquered peoples, the total army reached around 123,000 to 129,000 men. Here's the crucial point. That 100,000 figure was the total army of the empire. The Mongols never concentrated all their troops in one place. The army was divided into 2 months, units of 10,000 men. Each Chuman operated independently on fronts thousands of miles apart. When the Mongols invaded Europe in 1241, the entire force numbered only 80,000 to 100,000 men, including allied Turkish and Russian contingents. And this was further split into 3 or 4 separate armies, each moving along different routes. In Poland, where Duke Henry faced them, only a small diversionary force, 8,000 to 20,000 men, was present. Contemporary sources, like Historia Mongolorum, record about 10,000 Mongol cavalry in Poland. So why did everyone think the Mongols were 1,000,000 strong? Psychological warfare. The Mongols understood that fear could be more powerful than steel. Imagine being a European scout, climbing a hill at night to observe the Mongol camp. Thousands of fires glow in the darkness, stretching to the horizon. You report back. They are as numerous as stars in the sky. We do not stand a chance. What the observer didn't know was that the Mongols deliberately lit more fires than necessary. Each unit set multiple fires to exaggerate their numbers. They even used dummies, armor tied to mannequins, placed on spare horses, and set to move with the army. From a distance, the Mongols appeared 2 or 3 times larger than reality. The final trick wasn't just deception, it was strategy. Consider the perspective of a European knight. You see what seems like overwhelming numbers, yet you cannot discern formations, command structures, or real positions. The Mongols manipulated perception, controlling when and how the enemy would engage. The battlefield itself became a weapon. Feigned retreats, small raiding parties, and ambushes created chaos among larger, but less disciplined, forces. By the time Duke Henry's knights realized the Mongols' true size, it was too late. Their formation was broken, morale shattered, and discipline failed. This combination of cunning, intelligence, and psychological manipulation allowed a force of 10,000 to 20,000 Mongols to rout an army of 25,000 or more and leave Europe in shock. The Mongols weren't invincible because of numbers. They were invincible because of strategy, adaptability, and fear. And this principle echoes across history. Power is not always about quantity. It is about the intelligent application of resources, timing, and perception. You're used to European-style warfare. 2 armies face each other, line up in formations, and then charge into a decisive clash. Whoever has more men, heavier armor, or stronger knights is supposed to win. But the Mongols didn't play by those rules. Imagine yourself as a European commander. You arrange your formation to attack, and suddenly, a group of Mongol cavalry appears on your right flank. They shoot a volley of arrows, then vanish. Before you can react, another group appears on the left, fires more arrows, and retreats. From behind, from the front, from both sides at once. They seem to be everywhere at once. You turn right, turn left, spin around, trying to regroup. You start thinking, they must have an enormous army to attack from all directions like this. In reality, it's just the same group of Mongol cavalry moving with incredible speed, striking from multiple angles. Each Mongol cavalryman typically had 3 or 4 horses with him. When one horse grew tired, he mounted another, allowing him to travel 100 to 150 kilometers per day, faster than any European army could hope to march. A Persian historian named Adam Al-Juvani described Mongol cavalry as more numerous than ants and locusts, more than sand in the desert or drops of rain. But that wasn't their actual number. It was the impression they created. Even Friar Giovanni de Pien del Carpine, a European visitor to the Mongol Empire, noted that Mongol encirclements often made opponents think they were far larger than reality. Yet the reverse could also happen. King Hethum of Armenia, who saw the Mongols fight, wrote that their disciplined, tightly ordered formations often made them seem smaller than they were. 2 contradictory observations, one overestimation and one underestimation, tell us something important. No one really knew how many Mongols were present, and that uncertainty was a deliberate weapon. Fear, after all, is as effective as steel. Fear leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to defeat. Here's the most shocking part. In most major battles, the Mongols were actually outnumbered, not outnumbering their enemies. Modern researchers, analyzing sources carefully, have concluded that in Europe, Mongols consistently faced armies much larger than their own. Let's examine 3 major engagements to see the pattern. First, the Battle of Legnica, 1241. Duke Henry II of Poland assembled a formidable army, 25,000 to 30,000 warriors, including the most elite Teutonic knights, Templars, and Hospitallers. Facing them was a Mongol diversionary force commanded by Kadin and Baidar. Most reliable estimates place this force at 8,000 to 20,000 cavalry. Contemporary sources like Historia Mongolorum record about 10,000. That means the Europeans had at least 3 men for every Mongol, sometimes 6 or more. Yet the result was complete disaster for Europe. Nearly 40,000 dead, including over 500 knights, and Duke Henry himself was beheaded. 2 days later, at the Battle of Mohi, Hungary faced a main Mongol army. King Bela assembled one of the largest armies Europe had ever seen. Roughly 100,000 men. The Mongols, under Bada Khan and Subutai, numbered about 80,000, and only a fraction of these were actual Mongols. The rest were allied troops from conquered territories. The Hungarians had home terrain, supply lines, and numerical advantage. Yet the result? Disaster again. Around 60,000 Hungarians died. The Mongols collected 9 sacks of severed ears to count the dead, a grim but effective record-keeping method. Finally, the Battle of the Kalkar River, 1223. Russian principalities and Kuman allies gathered about 80,000 men to halt the Mongol advance. Subutai and Jebe commanded roughly 20,000 to 30,000 Mongol cavalry, a 3-to-1 disadvantage. But through masterful strategy, they executed one of history's most famous tactics, the feigned retreat. They pretended to panic and flee. The Rus-Kuman forces pursued them for 9 days straight, exhausting their men and horses, stretching their formations over miles. By the time they reached the Kalkar River, they were tired, hungry, disorganized, and ready to be crushed. And Subutai's army, fresh and disciplined, struck with devastating precision. See the pattern? In every major battle, the Mongols were outnumbered, yet they consistently won. And not just marginally, they won decisively, reshaping the course of history. The real question isn't how many Mongols there were. The question is, how did they win despite being outnumbered? The answer lies in 5 critical factors: organization, training, technology, tactics, and adaptability. Organization. The Mongol army operated as a tightly structured machine. Units were divided into 2 muns of 10,000 men, subdivided into 1,000s and 100s, each with a clear chain of command. Orders were transmitted swiftly using relay riders, allowing coordinated maneuvers over vast distances. Training. Every Mongol soldier was trained from childhood to ride, shoot, and fight as part of a unit. Their skill with composite bows on horseback was unmatched, allowing them to attack with lethal accuracy while retreating. Technology. They weren't just horse archers. They used siege weapons, intelligence networks, and even primitive psychological warfare. Fake fires, dummies, false retreats to manipulate enemy perception. Tactics. Feigned retreats, encirclements, flank attacks, and multi-directional strikes made smaller forces appear overwhelming. The ability to coordinate deception and real attack was central to their victories. Adaptability. Perhaps the greatest strength of the Mongols was their ability to learn and adjust. They studied enemy strengths and weaknesses, adopted new weapons, and integrated conquered soldiers into their forces. No army in Europe could match this level of flexibility. The Mongols didn't rely on sheer numbers. They relied on information, speed, coordination, and psychological mastery. They turned disadvantages into advantages and confusion into victory. And this is a lesson history teaches. In war and business and life, size matters less than intelligence, discipline, and adaptability. The decimal system. Genghis Khan created a revolution in military organization. He didn't just refine the old tribal system. He dismantled it completely and built an entirely new structure based on the decimal system. The smallest unit, called an arban, had 10 men. 10 arbans made a zun 100 men. 10 zuns made a mingan 1,000 men. And 10 minghans made a 2 mun 10,000 men. Sound simple? That's exactly its strength. This system was incredibly flexible. A 2 mun could operate independently or coordinate with other 2 muns. A zun could split off for a separate mission and then rejoin without wasting time reorganizing. Units could be deployed, combined, or restructured almost instantly. And here's what made it revolutionary. Genghis Khan broke down tribal boundaries. He deliberately mixed warriors from different tribes into the same units. Their loyalty was no longer to a tribal chief, but to their unit, their commander, and ultimately to the Khagan. This created a disciplined, professional army that transcended tribal rivalries, something Europe wouldn't see for centuries. Training from childhood. A Mongol child started learning to ride horses at age 3. At first, they were tied tightly to the saddle so they wouldn't fall. By ages 5 or 6, they could ride skillfully, and by 7 or 8, they began learning archery. By the time a young Mongol reached 14, the age of conscription, they already had over 10 years of experience riding and shooting. They could shoot accurately while galloping, even backwards. They could change horses mid-ride without stopping. Compare that to European knight. He might be well-trained in close combat, but he typically learned horseback riding later and rarely mastered mounted archery. European knights also wore 30 to 40 kilos of heavy armor, which limited mobility. A Mongol cavalryman wore light leather armor, weighing about 10 kilos, agile, fast, and free. Technology, the composite bow. The Mongols' primary weapon wasn't a sword or spear. It was a composite bow, made of 3 layers, horn on the inner face resisting compression, wood in the middle, sinew on the outer face resisting tension. This bow packed incredible power into a compact size, perfect for horseback. A Mongol bow could shoot 200 to 250 meters, and within 150 meters, accuracy was deadly. Each cavalryman carried around 60 arrows and quivers on their back and saddle. Imagine a tumult of 10,000 men, 600,000 arrows raining down on enemy formations. Tactics, the feigned retreat. The Mongols' most famous tactic was deceptively simple and devastating. A group of cavalry would attack, fire arrows at the enemy, then turn and flee. They looked panicked. The opposing army, thinking they had the upper hand, pursued. But the Mongols continued shooting while retreating, a skill requiring immense coordination. They could lure an enemy for hours, even days, as at the Kalkar River. When the opposing forces were exhausted, formation broken and far from their base, the full Mongol army would appear and surround them from all directions. The enemy, too tired to fight effectively and too far to retreat, faced total annihilation. Europe fell for this tactic repeatedly. Speed, unmatched mobility. Even the best tactics are meaningless without mobility. Each Mongol cavalryman had 3 or 4 horses, allowing them to travel 100 to 150 kilometers per day, unthinkable for European armies, which could only manage 15 to 20 kilometers. This speed allowed Mongols to strike unexpectedly, retreat, circle around, and attack again from a different direction before the enemy could respond. One remarkable example. After the Battle of Legnica in 1241, the Mongols needed to send a message to the main army in Hungary for 150 kilometers away. The message arrived in just 36 hours. No phones, no telegraph, just horses and a perfectly organized relay system. Now, you might be thinking, this is an incredible story, but what does it have to do with me? I'm not a 13th century Mongol cavalryman. But that's exactly the point. The Mongol army isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a lesson in timeless principles of success. Principles that still hold true today. Lesson 1. Quality matters more than quantity. In today's world, we obsess over numbers. Companies brag about employees. YouTube channels brag about subscribers. Entrepreneurs brag about products sold. But the Mongols show us the opposite. They didn't have the largest army, but they had the most skilled, disciplined, and organized one. Lesson 2. Flexibility beats rigidity. The decimal system and the mixed units allowed them to adapt instantly. In modern life, this is like being able to shift resources or teams without disrupting operations. Lesson 3. Preparation and training are everything. A child learning horseback archery for years might seem extreme, but the principle is universal. Mastery requires consistent, deliberate preparation. Lesson 4. Strategy beats brute force. The feigned retreat, the arrow rain, the speed. These were all about manipulating the environment and your opponent. In business, in negotiations, in life, knowing how to use strategy is more important than raw numbers. Lesson 5. Speed and timing are decisive. The Mongols struck when and where the enemy was weakest, moved faster than anyone could react, and seized opportunities relentlessly. Numbers alone don't guarantee victory. Discipline, training, innovation, strategy, and timing, the combination of these factors, is what turns a few into the undefeatable many. That's the real power of the Mongols. They didn't even have the best technology. Composite bows had existed for thousands of years, long before Mongols. What made them exceptional was how they used what they had most effectively. A Mongol cavalryman was trained from age 3 to 14, 11 years of continuous preparation. That's quality. That's excellence. In your work, your business, or your studies, you might not have the most resources, the biggest team, or the most money. But can you use what you have in the most excellent way possible? Lesson 2. Organization beats chaos. Genghis Khan's decimal system might sound simple, but its brilliance lay in that simplicity. Every soldier knew their position. Every unit knew its mission. There was no confusion, no arguments about authority. Orders from a general transmitted quickly down a clear chain of command. Compare this to European armies of the time. At Legnica, there were knights from Poland, Silesia, Lithuania, the Teutonic Order, Templars, and Hospitallers, all under Duke Henry's nominal command. But in reality, coordination was nearly impossible. Each faction pursued its own interests. In business, in life, in a team, do you have a clear system, or are you operating in chaos? Lesson 3. Adaptability matters more than raw strength. The Mongols constantly learned and evolved. Initially, they didn't know how to siege fortified cities. But when conquering China, they learned siege technology from Chinese engineers. They recruited these experts and brought them to Persia and Europe. They integrated soldiers from conquered peoples, Turks, Persians, Russians, not just as auxiliary forces, but as fully trained Mongol warriors. When they needed a navy to attack Japan, they built a fleet of 5,000 ships with 70,000 sailors, even though Mongols from the steppe had no naval experience. That's adaptability. That's the humility to learn what you don't yet know. In today's rapidly changing world, adaptability is often more important than raw skill. Are you willing to learn, or are you rigid with what you already know? Lesson 4. Perception creates reality. The Mongols understood that war is not just fought on the battlefield. It's fought in the enemy's mind. They deliberately created the impression of a massive army. They left cities standing as warnings. They let stories of their brutality spread, not because they enjoyed killing. Cities that surrendered peacefully were unharmed, but to ensure the next city surrendered without fighting. Modern life works the same way. Branding, marketing, and reputation matter, not to deceive, but to shape accurate perceptions of the value you provide. Lesson 5. Measure and optimize. A fascinating detail about Mongol military operations is how they measured losses. Before battle, they placed a pile of pebbles, each representing one soldier. After the fight, they retrieved one pebble for every survivor. The remaining pebbles represented the dead or wounded. This simple system allowed commanders to track losses, refine tactics, and improve for next time. In life and work, are you measuring what matters? Are you learning from results and adjusting? Back to Duke Henry on the fields of Legnica. When he saw the Mongol army, he assumed he faced a massive, unbeatable force. He fought bravely, but fear had already crept into his mind. That fear made him make mistakes. He charged into a trap, let his formation disperse, and essentially lost before the real battle even began. Now imagine if he'd known the truth. If he'd understood that he wasn't outnumbered, that the Mongols were fewer in number but better trained, better organized, and more adaptable, history might have unfolded differently. This brings us to the most important lesson. Knowledge is power. Understanding your opponent, understanding the real situation, and understanding yourself. This is the foundation of victory. The Mongol army, with just 100,000 men, created the largest contiguous empire in history, not through magic or brute force, but because they were disciplined, trained, organized, strategic, and knew how to maximize what they had. You might think you don't have enough resources, not enough money, not enough time, not enough skills, not enough connections. You might look at others and assume they have a bigger army than you, but maybe it's an illusion. Maybe their army is just a small, well-organized, fast-moving group, like the Mongols. Maybe you don't need 1,000,000 followers, just 100 passionate ones. Maybe you don't need every skill in the world, just mastery of a few core competencies. The Mongol story reminds us never to underestimate the power of a small, disciplined, organized group with a clear goal. 100,000 Mongol warriors defeated armies that were larger, better equipped, and ostensibly more powerful. You, with what you have today, can accomplish things nobody expects. Now I want to hear from you. Which lesson from the Mongol army resonates most with your life today? Leave a comment below. And if you found this story valuable, don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel. Remember, in life's battles, it's not the person with the biggest army who wins. It's the person who knows how to use what they have most intelligently. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.